In the suffocating heat of July 1099, as the First Crusade reached its blood-soaked climax outside the walls of Jerusalem, Godfrey de Bouillon made a decision that would transform holy war into something far more terrible. On the night of July 14th, hours before the final assault, the Duke of Lower Lorraine led his most trusted knights into a discovery that should have remained buried beneath the desert sand. What follows is drawn from suppressed Crusader chronicles, Arabic eyewitness accounts, and archaeological evidence that the Church has spent centuries trying to destroy. This is the story of the Ferrum Dei, God's iron fist, the heavy cavalry who learned to fuse their souls with steel and became something that was neither fully human nor entirely divine. From the Chronicle of Raymond of Aguilars, translated from medieval Latin and discovered in the Vatican secret archives in 1923. On the eve of our Lord's vengeance upon the Saracen, Duke Godfrey's scouts discovered beneath the eastern approach a temple of ancient construction, predating even the Roman garrison that once held this holy ground. The stones bore markings that Brother Anselm identified as belonging to the cult of Mars Equester, the Roman god of cavalry warfare. But there were other symbols too. Older than Rome, scratched into the walls by hands that worshipped powers we dare not name. The temple's discovery was not accidental. Godfrey had been guided by fragments of a text he'd acquired in Constantinople, a Byzantine military manual that hinted at rituals performed by the late Roman cavalry, ceremonies that had granted them supernatural prowess in battle against the Persian armies. The Duke, facing the seemingly impregnable walls of Jerusalem and dwindling provisions, decided that desperate times demanded desperate measures. The ritual required precise components, a relic of the true cross that Godfrey carried, the armor and weapons of his knights, and something the ancient text called the blood of willing sacrifice. But the sacrifice was not what the knights expected. They would not be offering their lives to God. They would be offering their humanity. From the testimony of Gerard, squire to Sir Hugh of Vermandois, given during his deathbed confession in 1102, we descended into that cursed place as the sun died. 20 knights, Duke Godfrey, and 3 priests who had agreed to perform what they called the marriage of steel and spirit. The temple was small, barely 30 paces across, but the air within was thick with something that made breathing difficult, like inhaling ancient dust and forgotten prayers. At the center stood an altar of black stone, stained with rust-colored marks that we initially took for iron ore. Brother Anselm knew better. Blood, he whispered. Centuries of it, absorbed into the stone itself. Duke Godfrey placed the fragment of the true cross upon that pagan altar, and the reaction was immediate. The air began to shimmer like heat rising from summer stones. The knights removed their armor, laying each piece upon the temple floor in precise arrangements that the Byzantine manual demanded. Then came the benediction, but spoken in words that predated Latin, syllables that hurt the throat to pronounce and seemed to echo longer than they should in that confined space. The transformation began when each knight donned his armor for the final time. As they buckled straps and tightened fastenings, the metal began to warm. Not the warmth of sun-heated steel, but an internal heat, as if the armor itself had developed a fever. I watched Sir Hugh's face as his helm settled over his features. His eyes widened in agony, but no sound escaped his lips. The metal was flowing, liquid mercury becoming solid again, but this time fusing with the flesh beneath. Their horses, brought into the temple despite the narrow entrance, began to change as well. The destriers' eyes caught fire, not metaphorically, but literally, orange flames dancing in their sockets without consuming. Their hooves struck the stone floor and left glowing marks, as if the very rock recognized their transformed nature. One beast screamed, but the sound held intelligence, almost human, in its articulation of pain and rage. When the ritual concluded, as dawn light began to filter through the temple entrance, 20 knights stood before me, and I no longer recognized any of them as men I had served. Their armor no longer reflected light but seemed to absorb it, drinking in the early sun and radiating something darker in return. Where chainmail had covered necks, the metal had woven itself into flesh, creating a seamless transition between man and war machine. Duke Godfrey raised his hand, and I saw that his gauntlet no longer ended at his wrist. The steel continued beneath his sleeve, visible through gaps in the fabric, spreading like metallic veins up his arm. "We are ready," he said. But the voice emerged hollow, resonant, as if spoken from within a great bell. "Jerusalem will fall before nightfall. I have seen it. We have all seen it." And I realized with horror that they were not speaking in sequence but in perfect unison. 20 throats producing one voice, one terrible promise of violence. The assault on Jerusalem began at dawn on July 15th, 1099. The Crusader chronicles describe a fierce but conventional battle. The truth, preserved in sources both Christian and Muslim, tells a very different story. From the account of Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, chronicler to Saladin's court, based on testimonies collected from survivors of Jerusalem's fall, the defenders manning the eastern wall reported that the Frankish cavalry did not charge in the manner of normal horsemen. They came in absolute silence. No war cries, no trumpets, only the thunder of hooves that should not have been able to approach so closely to walls they could not possibly breach. But breach them they did. The horses did not halt at the wall's base as any sane creature would. They ran upward, their hooves finding purchase on vertical stone as if the laws of God's earth no longer applied to them. Their riders' lances, which should have shattered against our fortifications, punched through limestone blocks as easily as penetrating silk. One defender, a man named Khalid, who survived because he fainted from terror and was thought dead, described the knight who reached the rampart where he stood. The Frankish warrior took 3 arrows to the chest, bolts that should have penetrated any armor. The knight looked down at the protruding shafts, then grasped one and pulled it free. Beneath the torn metal, Khalid saw not flesh and blood, but more steel, as if the man was armor all the way through. The knight felt no pain. Indeed, he seemed to feel nothing but joy. As he cut down defender after defender, he was laughing. A sound of pure ecstasy that was more terrifying than any battle scream. His companions were the same, singing hymns as they killed, their voices harmonizing impossibly, as if they shared not just purpose, but a single mind. The massacre that followed Jerusalem's breach lasted 3 days. The transformed cavalry were at the forefront of every atrocity, seemingly tireless, requiring neither food nor rest. They waded through blood that came up to their knees, and their armor drank it in, the metal growing darker and somehow denser with each life taken. But victory came with a price that only became apparent when the killing finally stopped. Sir Robert of Normandy was the first to try to remove his armor. According to witnesses, he worked at the buckles and straps for an hour, growing increasingly frantic as he realized what had happened. The armor would not come off because it was no longer separate from his body. Where steel met skin, the boundary had disappeared entirely. His gauntlets had become his hands, his breastplate, his ribs, his helmet, a second skull that he would wear until death. The knights discovered other changes as well. They could not sleep, though exhaustion pulled at their minds. They could not taste food, though they could still consume it. Most disturbing, they found themselves unable to feel tenderness, compassion, or love. Those emotions had been burned away in the temple, leaving only the capacity for rage and an all-consuming hunger for battle. When they were not fighting, they experienced symptoms that Brother Anselm recognized from his studies of possessed individuals: trembling, cold sweats, an aching emptiness that could only be filled by violence. They had become addicted to war itself, their transformed bodies requiring regular infusions of combat the way a normal man requires bread and water. Duke Godfrey reported these developments to the papal legate, who immediately recognized the theological catastrophe they represented. These knights had not become holy warriors, blessed by God. They had become something else entirely, bound by a ritual that predated Christianity, transformed by forces that answered to no bishop's authority. But Jerusalem had fallen. The First Crusade had succeeded, and in the intoxication of victory, The Church made a decision that would haunt Christendom for generations. Rather than condemning the transformation, they would study it. Rather than destroying what had been created, they would refine it. Rather than limiting this power to 20 knights, they would spread it to every Crusader army in the Holy Land. The age of the Ferrum Dei had begun, and the desert sand would run red with the consequences of their existence. Within months of Jerusalem's fall, the Church established what they publicly called armories of righteousness throughout the Crusader states. The largest and most secretive of these facilities was built in Antioch, within the ruins of the Church of St. Peter, the oldest cathedral in Christendom. What occurred within those sanctified walls represented a perversion of both metallurgy and theology so profound that even those who authorized its creation would later deny its existence. From the private journal of Brother Anselm the Armorer, discovered sealed in lead caskets beneath Antioch in 1834, I have become something I never imagined in my years of monastic service, not a craftsman of God, but a craftsman of transformation. They call what we create Saint Steel, as if invoking martyrs' names makes our work holy. But I have looked into the heart of our forges, and I know what burns there is not divine fire. The process begins with collection. Across the Holy Land, Crusader lords stripped churches and monasteries of their relics. Finger bones of apostles, fragments of saints' robes, splinters claimed to be from the true cross, nails said to have pierced Christ's flesh. All of it comes to us, wagon loads of holiness to be unmade and remade into instruments of war. We built the forge in the cathedral's crypt, a space that had once housed the bones of Antioch's first Christians. Those bones we removed, but their presence lingers in the stones, creating what Brother Matthias calls spiritual resonance. The forge itself is a blasphemous construction. At its heart burns a fire that requires no earthly fuel. We ignited it using a ritual found in the same Byzantine manuscript that guided Duke Godfrey, speaking words in a language that predates Babel itself. The flames burn green and cold, never warming the air around them, yet capable of melting steel in moments. Into this fire we placed the relics alongside iron ore blessed by 3 bishops. But the true catalyst is blood, not the blood of our enemies, but of martyrs, preserved in vials that the Church has hoarded for centuries. When martyrs' blood touches the molten metal, the fusion becomes something beyond alloy. The steel develops a kind of awareness, a hunger that grows with each transformation. The inscribing comes next, and this is where the knights themselves must participate. Each man takes a heated stylus and carves psalms into his own armor, using his own blood as ink. Psalm 144 is most common. Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. As the blood words are written, they sink into the metal, disappearing from sight, but not from existence. The armor absorbs them, learns them, becomes them. The resulting saint steel possesses properties that defy natural philosophy. It repairs itself when damaged, the metal flowing like liquid to seal rents and gaps. It grows heavier or lighter according to its wearer's need, becoming light as cloth when stealth is required, dense as lead when stopping a blow. Most disturbing is its appetite. With each enemy slain, the armor drinks in something from the dying, becoming harder, sharper, more resistant to damage. I have seen breastplates that have survived 100 battles, their steel now black as midnight and so dense that no earthly weapon can mark them. The weapons we forge possess even stranger qualities. They develop preferences, learning the weak points of different armor types, memorizing the angles required to slip between ribs or sever arteries. A sword that has killed many Saracens will guide its wielder's hand toward vulnerable spots in their enemy's defenses, as if the blade itself hungers for familiar prey. Sir Baldwin's mace, which I forged in our second month of operation, now seeks out heads with an eagerness that disturbs even its master. He reports that in the chaos of battle, the weapon pulls his arm toward skulls almost against his will. We work continuously, the forge never cooling, never resting. The green flames cast shadows that move independently of those who cast them. The chanting of monks echoes through the crypt day and night. Prayers meant to sanctify our work, but which sound increasingly like the keening of the damned. I have not left this place in 4 months. I am not certain I could leave even if I wished to. The forge has claimed me as surely as it claims the steel we feed into its maw. The transformation of the knights required their mounts to undergo similar changes, for a supernatural rider demanded a supernatural steed. The corruption of the Crusader war horses represented perhaps the most visible sign that the Ferrum Dei had moved beyond anything resembling God's work. From the testimony of Yusuf ibn Malik, an Arab stable master captured at Acre and forced to tend the Crusader cavalry's mounts for 2 years before his escape. They made me care for demons wearing horses' skins. This I swear by Allah the Merciful, though I know others will think me mad for saying it. The transformation ritual took place in the stables each full moon. The Frankish priests would come with their chalices of communion wine, but mixed into the holy liquid were fragments of their relics, ground into powder so fine it looked like grave dust. They forced this corruption down the horses' throats, holding the animals' heads back as they choked and convulsed. The changes came gradually over months. First, the destrier's hooves began to harden beyond normal keratin. I watched a stallion named Bayard strike a stone wall in rage, and instead of shattering his hoof, he cracked the stone itself. Within weeks, sparks flew when these beasts walked on cobblestones, as if their feet were made of iron rather than horn. Their eyes changed next, developing an inner glow that intensified during battle. I learned to recognize when they were about to attack because orange flames would literally dance in their pupils, like looking into the heart of a furnace. They began to understand human speech in multiple languages, Arabic as well as Frankish tongues. A knight could whisper commands, and his mount would respond with intelligence that no natural horse possessed. Most terrible was their developing taste for human flesh. After battles, if not carefully watched, they would feed upon the corpses littering the field. I saw a mare named Tempest crack open a dead man's ribcage with her teeth to reach the organs within. The knights did not discourage this behavior. Indeed, they seemed to believe it strengthened the bond between rider and mount, and that bond became something beyond natural. I witnessed Sir Geoffrey fall in a skirmish, an arrow through his throat. His destrier, Shadowmane, continued fighting without a rider, attacking enemy cavalry with tactics that should have required human direction. The horse reared and struck down 2 Saracen riders before returning to its fallen master, standing guard over the corpse and killing anyone who approached until the Franks could retrieve their dead. The knights claimed they could see through their horses' eyes during charges, experiencing the battle from 2 perspectives simultaneously. They would speak of their mounts' thoughts as clearly as describing their own. Thunderfoot wants to circle left, a knight might say, or Dawnbreaker senses an ambush ahead. The distinction between man and beast was dissolving, creating something that was neither and both. The final element binding the Ferrum Dei into a truly unified force was the daily ritual they called the Cavalry Communion, a ceremony that transformed individual warriors into a collective consciousness capable of coordinating with supernatural precision. From the confession of Father Dominic, delivered to the Bishop of Rome in 1105, before the priest took his own life, I performed the Mass every dawn for 3 years, and with each repetition, I felt my soul growing thinner, as if worn away by the terrible words I spoke. The ritual perverted everything holy about the Eucharist, twisting Christ's sacrifice into something that served only war. The knights would gather in whatever space we occupied, sometimes a captured mosque, sometimes an open field, sometimes amid the ruins of our own destroyed churches. They would kneel in perfect unison, their movements synchronized without any visible signal, and already I could see the hive mind beginning to form before I even began the consecration. The bread I offered was not wheat flour but earth, soil collected from battlefields where Crusaders had died, ground fine and baked into hard wafers that looked like communion hosts but tasted of copper and ash. The knights consumed these without hesitation. Though I saw some of the newer initiates struggle not to vomit, the wine was worse. We would collect blood from fallen enemies, Muslims and Eastern Christians alike, mixing it with stolen sacramental wine in proportions I still see in my nightmares. 1 part wine to 3 parts blood, heated until it steamed but did not boil, then poured into chalices that had been consecrated in proper churches before being brought to this unholy purpose. As each knight drank, I watched their eyes glaze and synchronize, all of them blinking at precisely the same moment, all of them breathing in perfect rhythm. They were no longer individuals, but nodes in a vast network of shared consciousness. During battles, this connection reached its apex. The knights reported seeing through each other's eyes, experiencing the combat from 20 or 30 perspectives simultaneously. Sir Marcus described it to me once. I am charging from the left while simultaneously striking from the right. I am being wounded in my shoulder while dealing a death blow with my sword. I am everywhere the cavalry is. Father, we are not many. We are one. This coordination allowed for tactical maneuvers impossible for normal cavalry. They could execute complex flanking actions without signals, each knight knowing instinctively where his brothers would be and what they would do. They never collided during charges despite the chaos of battle, flowing around each other like water finding its path. But the price of this unity was the dissolution of self. Knights who had been friends for years could no longer remember which memories belonged to whom. A warrior might recall his own wedding day, but also the wedding days of 15 other men, the experiences blending until none could be separated from the whole. They shared not just thoughts but dreams, and those dreams became collective nightmares that haunted them all simultaneously. I have watched strong men weep as they describe the horror of never being alone, of having their every thought instantly known to dozens of others, of feeling their individuality being devoured by the collective consciousness they had created. Some begged me to release them from this curse, but I knew no ritual of unbinding. What we had created, we could not unmake. The madness that resulted was not individual insanity, but a shared psychosis that spread through the entire cavalry like plague. They would sometimes speak in unison without meaning to, or laugh simultaneously at jokes no one had told aloud. I once saw an entire company of 30 knights turn their heads in perfect synchronization to look at something only they could perceive, some threat or opportunity visible only to their collective awareness. I am damned, Your Holiness. I know this with certainty. I have taken Christ's gift of communion and perverted it into a tool for creating monsters. The fact that these monsters serve the church makes my sin no less grievous. I can no longer perform the true Mass without seeing what I have done overlaid upon the sacred ritual. Every Eucharist reminds me of the corruption I have spread in God's name. May the Lord have mercy on my soul, for I have none left for myself. The Ferrum Dei's most horrifying discovery came not through theological study or alchemical experimentation, but through accident, when a fever swept through the Crusader garrison at Acre in 1101, killing hundreds of adult soldiers but leaving many orphan children behind. Brother Anselm noticed something that would forever darken the Crusader legacy. The younger the subject, the more complete the transformation. From the letters of Sister Marie of Acre, written to her abbess in France, and intercepted by Saladin's intelligence network in 1103. Mother Superior, I write to confess sins so terrible that I fear even God may turn his face from me. Yet, I must bear witness to what the Church has sanctioned in this cursed land. They call it the Holy Page Program, a name designed to obscure the abomination it truly represents. After the fever claimed so many of our soldiers, the Templar commanders gathered the orphan children, boys and girls alike, some as young as 8 years old. I thought they meant to place them in charitable care. I was devastatingly wrong. Brother Anselm had observed that younger bodies accepted the Saint Steel transformation more readily, their developing flesh fusing more completely with the corrupted metal. Where adult knights retained some separation between man and armor, children became inseparable from their steel almost immediately. The Church saw not a horror to be prevented, but an opportunity to be exploited. The selection process was methodical and cruel. They chose children who had witnessed their families' deaths, reasoning that trauma had already begun to hollow them out emotionally. Orphans from sacked cities were preferred, particularly those who had survived massacres by hiding among corpses. These children, they believed, had already been introduced to death and would transition more easily into becoming its instruments. I watched them fit little Guillaume, barely 9 years old, with his first suit of armor. Unlike adult plate, the children's steel was designed to grow with them, expanding as their bodies developed. But the metal did more than expand. It guided their growth, shaping their bones and muscles to better serve warfare. Guillaume's shoulders broadened unnaturally. His arms lengthened beyond normal proportion. His spine straightened to an inhuman degree. Within 6 months, he no longer looked like a child, but like something wearing a child's face. The training methods stripped away any remaining humanity. The children were deliberately starved, fed only enough to survive while their bodies were pushed through endless combat drills. Sleep deprivation was standard, the masters believing that exhaustion made the young minds more receptive to the collective consciousness. Religious indoctrination filled every waking moment, priests chanting scriptures about holy war until the words became meaningless sounds that the children would repeat mechanically. The physical changes accelerated at a pace that horrified even the program's architects. Young Beatrice, a girl of 10 who had survived the massacre at Ma'ara, lost all capacity for tears within 3 weeks. Her face became a mask of serenity, even as she practiced killing techniques on captured prisoners. The other children followed similar paths, their emotional ranges narrowing to a single channel. Zealous devotion to violence, sanctified by prayer. They became perfect child soldiers because they were no longer truly children. The transformation consumed their capacity for play, for curiosity, for anything except warfare and worship, twisted into a single impulse. They were obedient beyond anything human children could achieve, responding to orders with mechanical precision, never questioning, never hesitating, never showing fear or mercy. The Crusader commanders deployed them as scouts first, their small size allowing them to infiltrate enemy positions. But they quickly discovered these child knights possessed abilities that made them ideal assassins. They could climb walls that adults could not, squeeze through gaps in fortifications, and most crucially, their innocent appearance disarmed suspicion until the moment they struck. I witnessed young Thomas, 11 years old, assigned to eliminate a Muslim commander who had been gathering forces for a counterattack. The boy approached the enemy camp, disguised as a refugee child seeking shelter. He was welcomed, fed, given water. Then, at midnight, he rose from where he slept and methodically killed 17 men, moving through the tents with inhuman silence and precision. When he returned at dawn, covered in blood that he had not bothered to wash away, he knelt before the chaplain and recited the complete text of Psalm 18. I pursued my enemies and overtook them. I did not turn back till they were destroyed. Most disturbing was their practice of praying while they killed. They would recite the Pater Noster as they drove blades into flesh, sing Ave Maria as they set fires that burned entire families alive. They had been taught that violence was prayer, that each death was an offering to God. They believed this with the absolute faith that only children can possess, uncorrupted by doubt or moral complexity. The church created demons and called them angels. I can no longer participate in this horror, Mother Superior. I am arranging my escape from Acre. If this letter reaches you, pray for these children's souls, for they have been robbed of their humanity in the name of holy war. The child knights were not the only ones undergoing profound transformation. The adult Ferrum Dei, isolated in their secret compounds throughout the Crusader states, were evolving into something that bore little resemblance to the men they had once been. From the testimony of Rashid al-Hakim, a Muslim scholar captured at Ascalon and imprisoned for 18 months in what the Crusaders called the Iron Monastery of St. George, I was held in a fortress that had once been a Byzantine monastery, nestled in the mountains between Jerusalem and the coast. My captors were not interested in ransom or conversion. They kept me because I could read and write Arabic, and they needed someone to translate captured documents. This task gave me access to places ordinary prisoners never saw, and I witnessed things that still rob me of sleep. The knights lived in that place perpetually armed and armored. They did not remove their steel even to sleep, instead drowsing in their saddles or standing propped against walls. I never once saw naked human flesh, only metal forms that moved and breathed and spoke with voices that echoed from within their helms. The daily routine consisted of battle drills that lasted 8 hours, religious ceremonies that consumed another 4, and what they called purification through violence. Ritual combats, where knights fought each other to keep their skills sharp and their hunger for war satisfied. The monastery courtyard was permanently stained with blood that no amount of rain could wash away. They organized themselves by kill count, each knight's rank determined by the number of enemies he had slain. The senior knights, those with hundreds of confirmed kills, had undergone transformations so complete that I questioned whether they remained human at all. Their armor had continued to grow, covering parts of their bodies that should have remained flesh. Helms had sealed shut over faces that no one had seen in years. Gauntlets had fused completely, fingers melding into articulated claws that could no longer grip anything delicate but could tear through armor with terrible efficiency. One such creature, who the others called Brother Crimson, though I doubt that was his original name, had elongated impossibly. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his body stretched like heated metal, his limbs thin but possessing supernatural strength. When he moved, his joints clicked and scraped with the sound of metal on metal. I once asked my guard if Brother Crimson could still remove his armor. The guard laughed bitterly and said, "He is the armor now. The man is just a memory trapped inside steel." These senior knights were kept separate from normal Crusader forces, who feared them as much as they feared the Saracen armies. I overheard conversations between regular soldiers who spoke of the Ferrum Dei as if they were a necessary evil, weapons too dangerous to discard, but too terrifying to embrace. "They fight for Christ," one soldier told another, "but I don't think Christ would recognize them as his own." The true horror of the iron monasteries became apparent not in what occurred within their walls, but in what they collectively created, a network of consciousness that spanned the entire Holy Land. From the intelligence reports compiled by Abu al-Fadl, chief advisor to Saladin, translated from Arabic, our Sultan must understand that we face an enemy unlike any in military history. The Frankish heavy cavalry have created what their own scholars call the network of steel, a supernatural intelligence system that makes conventional military secrecy impossible. We have confirmed that knights stationed in different cities, separated by hundreds of miles, share awareness instantaneously. Information learned by one Ferrum Dei becomes known to all within moments. We tested this by feeding false intelligence to a captured knight in Damascus. Within hours, Crusader forces in Acre had adjusted their positions to account for the deception, though no messenger could have traveled that distance so quickly. They track our movements with precision that suggests divine omniscience. We cannot march an army without them knowing our numbers, our supplies, our intended targets. Ambushes fail because they somehow sense our positions before we strike. Night attacks are detected before we approach their camps. Most concerning, they share not just information but experience. When we killed a Ferrum Dei commander in battle, we discovered through interrogation of captured Crusaders that every other transformed knight immediately knew the tactical lessons learned from his death. They learned from their losses in real time, adapting their strategies while battles were still being fought. They have achieved something that military theorists have dreamed of for centuries: perfect battlefield coordination without need for messengers, signals, or command hierarchy. They function as a single organism with hundreds of bodies, making decisions collectively and executing them flawlessly. Your Excellency, we cannot defeat such an enemy through conventional means. We must find the source of their power and sever it, or the Holy Land will remain forever under their steel grip. Saladin read this report in the summer of 1186 and began to plan the campaign that would either break the Ferrum Dei or doom the Muslim reconquest before it truly began. He did not know it yet, but the answer to defeating God's iron fist lay not in military might, but in understanding the fundamental weakness of their transformation. The very unity that made them invincible would become the key to their destruction. By 1187, Saladin had united the Muslim territories surrounding the Crusader states and turned his formidable intellect towards solving what seemed an unsolvable problem: how to defeat an enemy that could not be surprised, could not be outmaneuvered, and seemingly could not be killed. His answer would come not from military genius alone, but from understanding that the Ferrum Dei's greatest strength was also their fatal vulnerability. From the private correspondence of Ibn Shaddad, Saladin's personal scribe and confidant, the Sultan has spent 3 years studying the Frankish Iron Devils, collecting testimonies from survivors, interrogating captured Crusaders, and consulting with scholars about the nature of their transformation. He has concluded that their power flows from unity, and unity can be shattered. He summoned to his court Sheikh Ahmad al-Rifai, a Sufi mystic who claimed knowledge of spiritual warfare dating back to the Prophet's time. The Sheikh examined our intelligence reports and declared, "They have bound themselves with chains they believe make them strong. But chains can be broken, and when they break, the force of their own binding will destroy them." We discovered their weaknesses through careful observation. The transformed knights never drink water during battle, sustained by their supernatural nature. But their armor, fused to flesh, makes them vulnerable to extreme heat in ways normal men are not. Steel conducts and traps warmth. In the desert sun, they become their own ovens. More crucial was the Sheikh's insight about their collective consciousness. "They are like a spider's web," he explained. "Touch one strand and the whole structure vibrates. But cut enough strands and the web collapses entirely." If we could isolate knights from their network, the sudden return to individual consciousness might prove catastrophic to minds that had forgotten how to exist alone. The Sheikh taught us counter-rituals, prayers from the earliest days of Islam that had been used to combat the jinn and other supernatural entities. We prepared blessed water using techniques preserved by Sufi orders, water drawn from the Zamzam well in Mecca, mixed with verses from the Quran written in saffron ink, then dissolved. This water, the Sheikh promised, would burn anything touched by unholy transformation. Saladin designed his trap with the precision of a master chess player. He would lure the Crusader army to the horns of Hattin, a plateau between 2 hills where no water existed for miles. There, under the merciless summer sun, we would test whether God's iron fist could be melted in his crucible. On July 4th, 1187, the Crusader army marched into Saladin's trap, and the Ferrum Dei rode to their doom, singing hymns of certain victory. What followed would be remembered as the day heavy cavalry learned it was not invincible. From the fragmentary testimony of Sir William of Tyre, one of only 3 transformed knights to survive the battle, recorded during his final confession before being executed by Templar assassins, we knew it was a trap. The collective consciousness screamed warnings from a dozen directions. But King Guy had overruled military sense with political necessity, and we were bound to follow. As we climbed toward Hattin, I felt the first touch of something I had not experienced in 8 years: individual fear. The sun rose, like the eye of an angry god, and the heat began immediately. My armor, which had always felt like a second skin, began to feel like a prison. The steel was absorbing the desert heat, and I could feel it conducting deeper into my flesh, cooking me from the outside in. Around me, I heard my brothers beginning to gasp, a sound we had not made since our transformation. We had not needed to breathe heavily. Now we were panting like dogs, and I realized with horror that our supernatural endurance was failing. By midday, we could smell our own flesh burning. The saint steel that had fused with our bodies was becoming our executioner, heating to temperatures that made the metal glow faintly red. Knights began to scream, sounds of agony that should have been impossible for us to produce. We had been immune to pain. Now we burned in armor we could not remove. Then Saladin's forces began their assault, and everything collapsed at once. They threw containers of liquid at us, and where it touched, the blessed water hissed and steamed against our corrupted steel. The armor began to rebel against its hosts, the metal literally peeling away from flesh, taking skin and muscle with it. The agony was beyond description, but worse than the physical pain was what happened to our minds. The hive-mind connection, which had sustained us for years, suddenly shattered. I was alone in my own head for the first time since the transformation, and the isolation was more terrifying than any enemy blade. I could feel my brothers' presences winking out one by one as they died or lost consciousness, each absence like a piece of my soul being ripped away. And then I remembered. Oh God, I remembered everything. Years of atrocities committed while experiencing them as part of a collective consciousness, justified by shared religious fervor, now flooded back into my individual mind with full moral weight. I saw the faces of children I had killed while singing hymns. I felt the final moments of innocence I had slaughtered while reciting prayers. The collective had diluted guilt across hundreds of consciousnesses. Now it concentrated entirely within my own. I watched Sir Marcus, my brother in arms for a decade, tear at his own helm, trying to remove armor that had become part of him. The metal wouldn't release him, but it was no longer protecting him. It peeled away in strips, exposing corrupted flesh beneath that looked like meat left too long on the fire. He was screaming prayers, but they were no longer triumphant battle hymns. They were desperate pleas for forgiveness. Our horses turned on us. The supernatural bonds that had made them extensions of our will dissolved, and I witnessed Shadowmane, Sir Geoffrey's destrier, who had served faithfully for 6 years, rear up and bring his iron-hard hooves down on his rider's skull, crushing helm and head together. Other horses fled in panic or attacked anything near them, their corrupted minds breaking down as completely as ours. The battlefield became a charnel house of twisted metal and corrupted flesh. Knights who had been invincible were now trapped in steel coffins of their own making, cooking alive as their armor rejected them but refused to release them. Some begged Saladin's soldiers to kill them. Others tried to complete their own executions. But bodies that had been transformed to survive terrible wounds would not die easily, even when we desperately wanted death. I saw the child knights, those poor, damned souls, experiencing the full horror of their lost childhoods in single, devastating moments of clarity. Little Thomas, who had killed 17 men while reciting the Lord's Prayer, lay curled in a ball, sobbing and calling for his mother. Beatrice, who had forgotten how to cry, was now screaming with tears streaming down her face as years of suppressed emotion returned all at once. The Saracen forces used their blessed water like baptism in reverse, casting it upon us and watching our cursed forms dissolve. Where it touched exposed flesh, the corruption burned away, but the pain of that purification was like being burned alive and reborn simultaneously. Some knights welcomed it, embracing the agony as penance for what we had become. By sunset, the army of God's iron fist was destroyed. Of 300 transformed knights who had ridden to Hattin, fewer than a dozen survived the battle itself, and most of those died within hours, as their breaking bonds triggered cascading failures throughout their corrupted bodies. The desert plateau was littered with shapes that had once been men, now reduced to grotesque sculptures of twisted steel and meat. The catastrophe at Hattin triggered immediate and brutal responses from both the church and the surviving Crusader leadership, who recognized that the Ferrum Dei program had become a liability that threatened to expose the darkest secrets of the crusading movement. From the sealed testimony of Gerard de Ridefort, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, delivered to Pope Urban III, and subsequently buried in the Vatican archives. Your Holiness, I write to report that the purge has been completed. All surviving Ferrum Dei have been located and terminated, along with the priests, armorers, and scholars who possessed knowledge of the transformation process. Their deaths were made to appear as casualties of Saladin's campaign or accidents of war. The iron monasteries have been systematically destroyed. We burned the facilities, scattered the ashes, and salted the earth beneath their foundations. Every piece of saint steel we could locate has been collected and melted down. Most we reforged into church bells, reasoning that the sound of holy bells might serve as penance for the metal's cursed history. Some pieces resisted all attempts at reforging, the metal refusing to melt even in the hottest fires. These we encased in lead and dropped into the deepest parts of the Mediterranean. The child soldiers presented particular difficulties. Those who survived Hattin were so psychologically shattered that most died within weeks, their minds unable to process the return of emotions they had been taught to suppress. The few who lived longer were quietly placed in isolated monasteries where they could be observed but never allowed to speak of their experiences. The last of them died in 1192. We have issued strict prohibitions against any future attempts to recreate the transformation. New crusades are specifically forbidden from employing supernatural enhancement of any kind. The knowledge has been declared anathema, and possession of the Byzantine manuscript that started this horror is punishable by immediate execution. Yet, I must report with concern that artifacts continue to surface. Farmers in the Holy Land occasionally unearth pieces of Saint steel, and some report that the metal remains warm to the touch even after decades in the ground. We have agents dedicated to locating and securing such discoveries, but the land has absorbed too much corrupted metal to ever be fully cleansed. Modern historians, examining the Hattin campaign, have long puzzled over certain anomalies in the historical record. The unusually high casualty rate among Crusader cavalry, the strange accounts of knights dying from causes that contemporary sources struggle to describe, and the Church's immediate and severe restrictions on certain military practices following the battle. Archaeological excavations in the Hattin region have uncovered mass graves containing remains that continue to disturb researchers. Skeletons have been found with armor fused directly to bone, metal that appears to have grown into and through human tissue in ways that medical science cannot explain. Carbon dating confirms these remains are from the late 12th century, but metallurgical analysis produces contradictory results, the steel containing properties that should not have been achievable with medieval technology. The legacy of the Ferrum Dei echoes through military history in ways both obvious and subtle. The rigid discipline and dehumanizing training methods of later military orders bear uncomfortable resemblances to the iron monastery programs. The psychological techniques used to suppress emotion and foster unit cohesion in modern special forces would be recognizable to the priests who performed the cavalry communion. The debate about how far soldiers should be pushed in pursuit of victory continues to this day. Perhaps the Ferrum Dei's truest legacy is the cautionary tale they represent, a warning about the price of pursuing victory through the abandonment of humanity, about the dangers of transforming warriors into weapons, and about the terrible consequences when religious fervor combines with the willingness to embrace any means to achieve holy ends. Thank you for joining Dr. Whisper of War for this exploration of the Crusader heavy cavalry's darkest chapter. Whether viewed as historical fact distorted by trauma and propaganda, or as cultural memory preserving truths too disturbing for straightforward documentation, the story of the Ferrum Dei reminds us that in the crucible of holy war, the line between righteousness and damnation can become impossibly thin. The desert sands of the Holy Land still hide secrets from the Crusades, and sometimes farmers report finding pieces of medieval armor that remain inexplicably warm to the touch, as if the corrupted steel still remembers the heat of Hattin and the souls it consumed. Don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Whisper of War for more explorations of military history's forbidden chapters. Until next time, remember that some victories cost more than defeat, and some weapons consume those who wield them.